black like me. Black like me. Black like me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey, good people. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. Hey, I'm enjoying season 9 because we're having these great conversations with individuals who can remember where they were when my original Justified Anger article dropped, or just remember life in Madison, civic life in Madison in 2013 when I wrote this essay about Madison failing its black community. And I'm going to be getting into that with my guest in just a few minutes. But at first, I just want to talk about something that happened to me recently. And I want just want you to hear and just let me know, do you think I'm nuts, or could you see yourself doing the same thing? I've always been trained to land on my feet and to think creatively. And so I was recently out of town for several days. We got a crap load of snow while I was gone. And I had to get back in time because I was giving a keynote speech out of town. It was like a citywide event. They were bringing together hundreds of adults. And then the next morning, they wanted me to present to 500 seventh graders, something I'd never done before. Got a notice from, on my app saying, you're flying through Dallas and they just want you to know that there's a travel advisory. So I thought, Dallas, they don't know what to do with snow in Dallas. Let me reroute myself. One option was to go through Phoenix, but it was a 5-hour layover. Nope, that's not going to work. Or fly to Chicago. I hate O'Hare with a passion. Chicago is my city of birth, my city of origin, but I hate its airport. But I thought I could walk home from O'Hare if I had to. So if I could just get to O'Hare, I could get back home. I fly to O'Hare. My flight is canceled. They won't let me get on the last flight to Madison because it's overbooked. And so I was talking to an agent, and I can tell that she was black. I know some of you won't understand that because you have sworn yourselves to the belief that you can't tell someone's ethnicity by their voice, but I knew that it was a sister. And I told her that I had to get back to give some speech, that has something to do with, the theme of black history and black heroes, just kind of let her know, who she was talking to. And to let her know as a brother she was talking to. So she switched me to another airline, to United. Yeah, some of y'all didn't know that you could do that. That's why I'm really pushing for more diversity in places, because black people take care of black people and don't ask a whole lot of questions. So she switched me to United, but they didn't switch my baggage. They delayed my flight hour after hour after hour. Once they delayed it from 8 o'clock to 10, and then they said they're going to delay. Once they said it's to 10, I started packing up my stuff, thinking, okay, the last bus that goes from O'Hare to Madison is in 2 hours. That's going to get me home at 2:30. Then I've got an Uber. I won't get home until like almost 2:45. I said, I've got to be innovative. I don't want to wait for that. I didn't pack a heavy coat. I didn't want to walk to to that bus system. I pulled out my phone and I Ubered from O'Hare to Fitchburg, Wisconsin. I Ubered. Listen, I've been trained. You've got to listen, you can cry over spilled milk. You can do all this stuff, but listen, you got a brain. What do you want to do with it? And I realized I don't want to ride on a crowded bus. I don't want to wait for 2 more hours. I don't want to get home at 2:30 and then call my wife to pick me up. It's a park and ride. There's nothing open. I don't want to stand outside. A brother standing outside at 2 a.m. Look like I'm ready for a drug deal or something like that. And so I called an Uber. So the gentleman pulled up. I got in the car and he said, okay, welcome, sir. He said, we're going to, and then he swipes his phone. He says, Wisconsin. I didn't realize this. If you're an Uber driver, or know people who are, maybe you could corroborate the story. I don't think he knew he was going to Wisconsin. And so he got me home in 2 minutes from Terminal 2. 2 hours from Terminal 2 to my driveway. He got me home I got home an hour and a half before the Van Galder would have gotten me home. Now, I know, I'm just going to answer because I know you're wondering. It cost me $250. But had I gotten a hotel and Ubered to it and back, listen, I'm so glad I did it because I just was trying to find my luggage the next day. Found out that the 9 a.m. flight that was going to bring me home in time to change and get to my speaking engagement was delayed. So I did the right thing. But I'm just curious. Was that crazy? Would you have done that? Would you, Jeremy, am I crazy? my daughter Lexi said, "Dad, I respect you for being innovative enough." But like, would it ever cross your mind? And this is not even like about race or anything. This is just about innovation. Would you have thought to call Uber or to order Uber?
No.
Really? What would you have done?
Waited for the plane flight or
Oh my gosh.
very timidly went to the bus station?
And listen, if you notice, first of all, can you tell the people they're black on the phone?
Yes.
Okay. And would you have tried to not identify as black, but would you have tried to appeal to that cultural solidarity?
I mean, were I a well-respected black pastor trying to get to an MLK speech about it? Yes. Were I me? No.
Okay, so we're me, and you are me. Do you and is it interesting to you that I would think, okay, how do I let this lady know that I'm black also? Like, is that an interesting concept that I would think, okay, she wasn't doing anything overtly black. I could just tell the cadence in her voice that she was a sister, but I had to let her know that I was a brother to see if there was any special tricks up her sleeve that could get a brother home.
There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, sometimes when I think somebody might be from the part of Pennsylvania that I'm from, I throw in some kind of local thing that only they would get, like a mispronounced town name that we mispronounce around there, just to see if they're from where I'm from. And sometimes they're like, oh, yeah. And they hope, yeah. I mean, when I bought my first car, I noticed that the guy had, I think, like a pin from like the next town over, and I was like, "Hey, do you know?" And he's like, "Oh, actually, that's where I grew up, and I got a deal on the first car that I ever bought."
So, do you think I'm crazy?
No, I think it's crazy. It only cost $250 though. I somehow imagined that an Uber across state lines that cost for 2 hours would be several $100s.
Well, when I first pulled it up, it said $197. Then I ordered it, and then it said the original rate has changed, and then it came back at like $250. And then I tipped him really well because I realized he didn't know he was going to Wisconsin and then had to ride 2 hours back. And I stressed over that for like 2 seconds. Then I thought, you know what? I'm an Uber guest and I just need to be able to sit back here. I have a lot of stuff that's going on. Let me just process. I woke up when they were turning off of 90 onto 12 and 18. Jackie called me like, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm by Ho Chunk Gaming. I'm almost home." And that's a turn off into like the Cambridge Madison exit. And I got home and I walked in the door at 5 minutes to 1, knowing that the Van Gelder would not get to Madison until 2:30. And yeah, I was a little light. I mean, 250, but I was proud of myself, and I got to sleep all the way home. And I didn't freeze that badly because he had the heat on. I didn't have to worry about a coat. But I just wanted to laugh about that because it's one of those experiences that if I don't say something about it, it's like this secret I have, and I'm not laughing about it. But my brain is always just sort of working. Like, okay, how you gonna get out of this one, buddy? I tried to get out that night, but so the plane, the airlines couldn't get me here, but Ali, my Uber driver, oh boy, brought a brother all the way home to my driveway. So that was great. All right, I digress, but I just had to just say that for a moment because as I've been telling family members, they're chuckling. They're like, "Wait, how much are you?" That's not that bad. But now it's giving people an idea. Well, if I'm ever stuck, I just sort of thought of it as my own private limo that I had car service.
That's money well spent.
I think so too. Thank you. So listen, you all, as I'm continuing to talk with friends and colleagues who either were there when I wrote Justified Anger, were there when it dropped, or somehow helped me wrestle with what the next steps would be. I've been having conversations with them about what they remember and what that's like. And so today, my special guest is a friend. It's a colleague. His name is Jim Bauer. Jim he's a number of things and has just a real interesting work background. But he has a consulting company that's called Blue Planet Partners. And their mission is to accelerate social innovations that create transformative impact. And as a visionary who has often felt stuck in my own visionariness, it was sort of a match made in heaven. So we met a number of years ago, stayed in touch, but this is how we reconnected. After I wrote Justified Anger, the community wanted me to fix things and to address things. And all right, you opened your mouth, and so what are you going to do? And with very little money and very little access. And we got together at a restaurant, and he just gave me some real sound advice about what it takes to change issues. He said, let's not even look at this as race. Let's just look at how complex it is. This is what it takes to look at real complex issues that don't have technical solutions. Now, I'm throwing out a lot of technical jargon that Mr. Bauer is going to help us to unpack. But as we began to talk, he shared some things that actually saved me a lot of stress because I had taken it upon myself to fix things that I did not have the wherewithal to do it. Had I been given 2 $10 million, you can't just fix something as complex as racism with a bank by bankrolling it. You need other things that are there. And so we're going to just talk a little bit about some of those conversations and the way it's really played out. And if there's enough time, I want to let you know something that he and I are both working on together. I've secured his services to help me with working on the Center for Black Excellence and Culture, where he is my project manager. So he's helping to really hold all the pieces together, from financing to funding, fundraising, not necessarily responsible for all those pieces, but coordinating them so that I can continue being the visionary that's making sure that we're raising the $36 million so that we can break ground in this beautiful 37,000 square foot facility shortly, in just a few months. So, whew, that's a mouthful. With all of that, Mr. Bauer. Jim, how you doing? Welcome to Black Like Me.
Doing good.
Jim, do you think I was crazy for catching an Uber from Chicago?
Not at all. Not at all.
That was a good use of $250?
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you have ever done that or thought to do that?
My wife would do it in a heartbeat.
I was going to ask you, would it have been you or would it have been Jen?
She would do it in a heartbeat.
I didn't know Ubers went across state line. I didn't know if you could. Like I don't know if he was set up for tolls. It was on my receipt. Yeah, but what was the first thing that came in your mind when I said, and I called it Uber? Were you thinking that's typical Alex? That's what Alex, a little later, would do. That's typical. That's typical G action. What were you thinking when I first said that?
Oh, I thought you problem solved. And you went down the list of possible ways to solve that problem, and you got yourself. This problem had to get solved.
Yes.
To make a day that was productive the next day, and that's it's a lot of money, but in the scheme of things, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the impact.
It certainly lowered the stress rate.
Yeah.
And not only did I just want to get home in a hurry, I knew that I had to drive to the western part of the state the next day, and I wanted to be able to see my family, see my wife a little bit. So no, thanks. It was good to really talk about, just to kind of process that. Jim, you and I met a number of years ago, probably 15 years, if not more.
Easily 15, yeah.
Because I was working on a development project with our church at the time, and an elected official said, you need someone to talk to you about the infrastructure that's needed to do a development project. At that time, we were going to rebuild the church and put like a small strip mall in it and a gym and those kinds of things. And that alder connected us. And you and I talked a little bit in our office, and then sometimes we go on long walks. I must have trusted you because you're the only person I know that would have gotten this brother to walk on a frozen lake at nighttime. Yeah. Not even just during the day, but at nighttime, and I could hear water running. I heard moving water. Was that just my imagination? Didn't you hear that moving water?
No, we tried to get close to it.
And I didn't. I did. Wow. I don't even know how we got there. We were. I thought, this is interesting. This guy doesn't want to just sit down at Perkins and eat pancakes, or a restaurant, just eat pancakes. Like, hey, let's walk. And then when I saw us getting closer to the lake at nighttime, but I have to say, it was fun. That was fun walking on the lake. It was scary, but it was fun.
Yeah.
So we would talk about a number of things. And what's interesting, Jim, is that I'm a visionary. And people love and hate visionaries. They love to hate visionaries because we have ideas. I think that they think that we try to make life crazy for people. We see things without expiration dates. So if we see it, we think it's got to happen right now. We don't necessarily see the price tag. But I know that in various times in my life and career, people who work closely with me have not known, well, how do you do this? How do you understand visionaries? How do you understand the vision? And then how do you begin to put a plan together by having the visionary lead the way, but not becoming, not becoming problematic. But an aspect of your business is accelerating vision. Like you all run towards the people that other people are running away from. So like, how did you know that was a niche and a niche that you were a match for, just in general, for the kind of work that your business does?
So the way I think about, my life is, it's all pretty clear in the rearview mirror.
Sure.
Over 30, 35 years of things I've done that slowly has made clear to me the work that I do in the world. And gotten increasingly better and better at the craft of accelerating social innovation. Mm-hmm. The world is full of aspirational energy, visionaries, mm-hmm. Someone who wants to go somewhere, oftentimes transformationally somewhere. Mm-hmm. But most of the time, visionaries have never gone there.
True.
So like the visionary wants to climb Mount Everest. That social innovator has an idea that they want to birth into the world, but they've never climbed a mountain. They don't want to get good at climbing a mountain. They want to just get up that mountain
One time.
And so the vast majority of social innovators and social innovations die on that path up that mountainside. And so I'm wired to see the world full of extraordinary ideas, but have come to realize, after 35 years, that great ideas are a dime a dozen. They're a piece of a puzzle, but require a symbiotic relationship between, because an endeavor, a social problem without a vision, a visionary, is a problem that's completely stuck. Someone, some entity, some organization, some innovator has to want to go somewhere. That said, without the capacity to implement, to execute, to shape, to create structure around that idea, that vision just spins its wheels on the ice. And so you need both.
So Jim, so it's really not the vision of the visionary that's problematic. It's that spinning, where people are like, you always say stuff, but nothing ever happens. Like you have these ideas, but they never come to fruition. So it's not because someone can sort of sense or see the future. It's the spinning that tends to wreck relationships in organizations. I mean, would you agree? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, so oftentimes a visionary without strong implementation capacity around them just churns up new ideas,
Right.
And because their gift is to see what's reality today and see a different future, see something in the ecosystem of what they care about that says this has to shift. And this is how I think it should shift. For example, the Center for Black Excellence is a great example of you in that visionary role.
Sure.
We can certainly talk about that as an example. But what's missing in the world, the way I see the world, is we are creating the capacity, because of technology and the ability to weave ourselves together in relationship, the ability to start social innovations on a dime. It's so easy to create a nonprofit. It's so easy to get going with an idea. What's missing is the capacity to take an idea and dance with that visionary energy,
Right,
so that it can get somewhere real.
I think that's accurately stated. What would you say is the percentage of leaders who are like bona fide visionaries? Like when you look at managerial leaders, administrative leaders, I know we're the minority, but like I've heard some people say our type might be like 5% of the kind of leaders.
Well, the 15%. You don't get to a leadership role without some capacity to envision.
Sure. But I'm thinking like bona fide, like people who are wired similarly, to the way I am, like folks who would just say visionary leaders, like maybe 15.
10 to 15, 10% ish.
So this is interesting to me because
that are pure wired.
Okay, pure wired. Okay, and I identify with being purely wired that way. So that makes sense to me. But and this sort of leads to what I think is important about our relationship and discussions that we had 12 years ago, well, 10 years ago around justified anger. Okay, so people aren't used to seeing purely wired visionaries. Yeah. I know a lot of pastors who are visionaries. I know a lot that are administrative. My buddy, Reverend Allen at Mount Zion, he's former military. Like he's very structured. He runs our Black ministers thing. So he's the epitome of a Black preacher, very charismatic and outgoing, brilliant, but very structured. He wants minutes. He wants deadlines. My wife Jackie's like that. She's that way. But in my experience, because people have not interacted with very many visionaries, and then I'm a vocal one because I have a pulpit and nonprofit, I think people, they confuse Blackness and visionariness and think somehow that it's cultural. I think you're one of the first people who, in describing the way visionaries function, you've helped me to ferret out the difference, that I'm both Black and visionary. But I realize in my circles, a lot of people have attributed that quality to being Black, and that's not the case. And so when I've shared ideas, I sometimes think that people have responded like, well, that's a Black thing. Or this is the way Black clergy work, or Black pastors kind of function in this way. And the two really come together on me, which doesn't necessarily create a problem, but I think in having this discussion with you about these different types of leadership or expressions of leadership, you helped me to realize that those two are not mutually inclusive.
Yeah.
Which is really important because sometimes the pushback for me, particularly as our churches become more diverse, is, oh, that's how Black church functions. But that's really how visionary functions. So like when you told me you've worked with visionaries from different industries, whether it's health or whatever it is, those weren't necessarily Black leaders, but they were wired very similarly. In fact, some of those people probably prepped you in working with me. And so it wasn't until you talked about just some of those experiences that I thought, well, I would have thought the same thing as that. I would have said the same thing. I would have done exactly the same thing. And I thought, that's not Black. That's my wiring and my temperament. And I just think I just want to state first that was really helpful in understanding myself, because I thought it was Black. And so I was wondering why other Black people weren't getting with what I was saying, like including my wife, who's an implementer. Like, what's wrong with y'all?
Right.
Like, aren't you down for the cause? Don't you see it? Can't you see it? And they couldn't. And so when you and I had discussions about how I would approach things, it gave me a different identity in how I approached the world and what I needed. It also helped me to realize that if my temperament were not white or Black, it's just visionary, then the people who could help me implement didn't have to be Black in order to understand Blackness. They had to understand visionaries and vision in order to help to push that ahead. That began to demystify my approach to race relations, whatever it would be. We'll talk about that a little bit. Sure. But that clearly demystified it in a way that I don't think very many Black leaders, civic leaders who are also visionary, have understood. And so it somewhat limits their ability, depending on what the vision is, to carry it out. And so that was helpful. You and I have talked about a number of things, but do you remember any of the early conversations we had around justified anger? Like, I know in my 10-year anniversary article, I wrote that I was having coffee or something with a friend who said, don't let these people crucify you. Like, and it wasn't like you were begrudging white people, but you're like, do not let the white community lay this at your feet. They're going to crucify you because this is not a technical problem. This is a complex problem. You can't fix it with just getting a $5 million grant. Don't let them crucify you. And I thought, this man is crazy. I'm a Black civic leader. I got to fix it. And that just opened the door for us to begin to have some of the discussions that we're talking about today. But do you remember any of those early discussions?
Yeah, you and I had kind of drifted away for a bit,
right?
And so I was not tracking tightly the immense amount of work post that article and all the organizing that occurred.
You're right.
The 900 plus people that came together,
right?
And then the working groups that came out of that, and the strategy development of how to approach that. So I came in, right at that point where it was my immediate reaction, again based on the years of this, was, oh crap. What I sensed was back to the role of the visionary.
Sure.
You played that role in the article.
Right.
So you basically said there is work to do. There is real and substantive work to do. We are not the community that we should be. And let me tell you more about that. And so, that's what a visionary does. It's the calling to the work we need to do.
Right. As
a society, as a community, as a neighborhood. But in this case, you're calling this community to work, to task. Then, of course, what does everyone want you to do?
Fix it.
So, as any good leader does, the people are telling you, here is the responsibility.
And I'm overly responsible.
And you are overly responsible. So I walked into that, you were many months into that process. I think almost even a year of planning.
Sleepless nights, yes.
And that work plan that was laid out in those documents, in the working groups that were really diligently working.
Yes, they were.
I started putting budgets to that. And I started.
You did.
And I started putting time frames to that, and I started to basically say, Alex, let's say, your nonprofit got $15 million a year,
Right.
just some crazy number. That's not a problem that can be fixed with your organization and that kind of money. You are what was being confused was a technical problem versus an adaptive problem. My sense was
Explain the difference between those two.
So a technical problem is something that we know what the cause and effect relationship is.
Sure.
And it can be kind of a simple problem or a complicated problem.
Give me an example of one.
So my car needs gas.
Okay.
I know how to do that. I can go to the gas station, drive to the gas station, put in a credit card, put the pump in, get gas, problem solved.
Right.
Technical problem.
Solved.
I can teach that to my 16-year-old, 15-year-old kid pretty quickly.
Sure.
And they can solve that problem because we know cause and effect really easily.
Right.
So that's a simple technical problem.
Sure.
On the way home, my car breaks down. It just stops
Right.
in the middle of the street. Now all of a sudden, I am out of my element. That's a fixable problem, but I can't fix it
Right.
because it needs expertise to fix that I don't have.
Sure.
So we can apply technical expertise, and we got it all over the place. You get it to the mechanic shop. They can solve that problem. They can figure out what it is. They can diagnose it. They can fix it. It's going to cost money. It's going to take some time, but that problem is fixable.
Right.
Those are technical problems. And so then there's a whole basket of problems that aren't that. And they're really in the space of what's called complex adaptive problem space.
Right.
And so, I mean, you let's use an example of, have you ever wanted to lose weight?
Yes.
That's in the domain of complex. There's you don't know what cause and effect is.
Right.
It's in a stew of all kinds of things. It's shifting constantly. What worked today won't work tomorrow. What works for you doesn't work for me.
Right.
If it was a ordered problem, a technical problem, we apply this solution, and it will work every time. Take
this diet pill,
Yep.
and you'll lose weight.
And so the challenge of racism, is a couple problems. One is that it's not a fixable problem. It's a problem that we need to wrestle with. We need to, but it's from my perspective, it is completely in the land of the domain of complex adaptive space. And so what I was seeing in those documents was lots of technical fixes.
Right.
If we do this, then that. And what the community was saying was also, Alex, you take the charge.
Right.
You take responsibility for this so that we do not have to wrestle with this problem. We do not have to make the changes.
We can sit back and watch you do it. Jim, let me add this example to some problems that are complex. One of our funders asked, how will your work impact grade point average? Now, you're married to an educator, and that's a loaded question because, all right, we have children that are sofa surfing, which means they're homeless or they're unhoused, so they don't have a set place to live. And so they're in this school this week, and then they're in another school next week. Mom may be working 2 or 3 jobs in order to try to get the child and the family stabilized, which means that she may be missing the parent-teacher, conference, same thing, or with the dad. Or you may have teachers that have not worked with children who are socioeconomically disadvantaged or who are from a different culture. And then you have parents who might have had their own experiences with schools, or teachers who've had their own experience with parents. You have all of those swirling pieces that are going on.
You could add 50, 100 other variables.
Exactly. And so you can't just say by just helping Johnny take homework or get Johnny in a mentoring program would fix the issue. What makes it so adaptive or so complex is that there's so many moving pieces that you can't just address grade point average, because then the child may be hungry and other things that are going on. And so, or trauma from moving away from other family members. And so we found that all of those things were swirling inside the issues of race. And what our community was used to funding was programs and activity. But because of my article, they wanted to somehow alleviate our community from the burden of being seen as racist or crippled by its own sense of colorblindness. When you started bringing in these elements of how complex this is, it caused me to catch my breath. I remember saying to you, hey, this person was talking to me about there might be a way to get specialized taxes, and then if we get the community to approve a 0.1% of a tax hike, then we could use those dollars to fix the problem. And you said, wait, first of all, you can't have a tax issue and raise tens and hundreds of millions of dollars and give it to one nonprofit. So Alex, that's not going to work. You can't ask all the taxpayers to pay a sugar tax, and then that money's going to go to Nehemiah. Secondly, what do you mean it? What is it? What are you trying to fix? I'm like, the race issue. And when you start bringing up all these different pieces of it, I immediately understood this in part is why the issue never gets addressed, because you get Black people, social activists, nonprofit people working, but the others who are part of the equation think that it's not their work, so they don't change the way they see things or think about things or act. And this is why we never get this problem addressed, because one, we treat it like it's a technical problem, like just get enough gas and the car will go. Yeah. Rather than think about all the other moving pieces that we don't want to talk about.
Or another way to think about problems is what is the resolution you have on a problem? So literally how tight or broad your frame of the problem is. Like racism as a problem is like a 1,000 feet up in a helicopter looking out. Mm-hmm. Systemic then you maybe drop down.
Sure.
Systemic racism is a little more defined,
right,
a little lower down, a little more concrete,
right,
but still pretty high resolution.
Right.
Then you drop down. You can keep dropping down in resolution to, like, let's say, federal drug laws in the United States have systemically impacted communities of color, especially black people,
right.
Dramatically more. And so, and thus this law is unjust and needs to be changed. And then you can drop down and drop down and drop down to, the interaction with that security officer and that child in our school,
right, implicit bias
was absolutely unacceptable, and we believe have some sort of intention, and so that's part of the problem with talking or working in this space,
right,
is where is your resolution,
right,
and you have to eventually drop down if you want intervention. You eventually have to drop down into the problem definition that has enough resolution that you can work with it,
right,
that you know what you're trying to intervene against. And so that too is the problem with racism is what is the work we need to do. What are the changes that need to be made in our community?
Are they attitudinal? Are they in the heart?
Yeah.
Are they just actions? What are we trying to resolve, and what does this look like?
Yep. Or are there specific changes in policy, in law, in how this particular organization is interacting with our community that needs to change?
Right.
So that resolution, really matters to be able to understand the work that needs to be done, and so that too is kind of the complexity of how to engage people in the work of changing hearts and minds and or specific things that are happening in our society that are impeding the direction of our community.
Why support Black Like Me podcast? There are very few places where Black activists and innovators can listen to and hear someone so aptly and culturally appropriately voice their concerns and dreams and aspirations and fears and illnesses and cultural commonalities. Equally, there are so few places where concerned non-Black thinkers and feelers, readers and watchers, lovers of culture, stalwarts of racial justice and harmony can go to learn, lean in, and to be a quiet fly on the wall in Black spaces and experience deep personal transformation through listening to honest Black people's truth. Black Like Me podcast is that for so many people in this nation and around the world. Now, while your financial support beginning at as little as $2 a month will get you access to pre-released information, updates, conversations, insights, and exclusive events, your support also affords us the opportunity to expand the quality and reach of our excellent programming in thoughtful and authentic ways to more and more people. And more importantly, white people need to stop trying to get free shit from Black people. All right, seriously, your financial support is a vote of confidence, and it's an enabler of vision and innovation. So why not click that link today and join the movement? I want to thank you in advance for your support and your partnership. So, Jim, does that make this more complex than what maybe you see inside of the acceleration of social innovation that you do with individuals or organizations? I mean, for example, you have a group of funders who want to support My Justified Anger initiative, but then you have the rest of the community watching because they'll see the philanthropic organization stand on stage and hand me an oversized check with, 6 figures in it. Yeah. And then 10 years later, they want me to write an article about all the changes I've made with that $170,000 for, a $2 billion problem annually in our community and state. Does that make the complexity of this even more interesting, that you have funders, then you have doers, and then the general population watching and weighing in thinking, are we there yet? I saw them give you money. Yeah. Why have you not fixed this problem?
Why this problem? We can't even define or agree to what the problem is. And that too is part of the civic conversations happening, not just in our community, but across the United States. And it's ripping people apart and communities apart about what is the problem. It's again, I won't put a foot on the scale, but it's even like the conversation about outcomes versus opportunities. Mm-hmm. Are we talking about equality of opportunity? Or are we talking about equality of outcomes? That's knee deep into the problem definition space. What problem are we trying to solve?
Sure.
And some of us really see the measurement about equality of outcome that we're shooting for. Others say, no, we need to create equality of opportunity. Mm-hmm. And that's our mark in the water.
Sure.
And so that then creates paths forward or not based on how we can have a conversation. Because if you're an equality of opportunity guy and I'm an equality of outcome guy, we're not going to see the world the same way.
Right. Now, what people have to understand, particularly our friends, our the listeners of Black Like Me podcast, is when America was completely inhabited by its indigenous population, I'm sure there were differences between different people groups, tribal groups, affiliations, federations, but it wasn't a system for racism where one dominant group could control the money, could control the policies, could control the land, the resources, etc. So when that European exploration began, it set some new things in place in this country. So when we talk about addressing issues of race or racism, we're talking about a status that has never been held, that's never been attained in our country. So we are trying to do something that's never happened before. So Jim, to your point, you and I had these deep conversations, and I have to tell you, man, you pissed me off in the early conversations because I was thinking, this man doesn't understand. My black butt is in the sling. These people are giving me like $200,000. I got to fix the problem. I got to bring it home. I'm thinking about the work we're doing on the center. One company has donated $300,000 to just market my strategies, to just market the center. Like $300,000 to just talk about it in the public eye. It hasn't fixed an issue just on marketing, but for $200,000, I'm expected to fix this and unify the black people and pacify the white people and then include the non-black and non-white people and bridge the gap between, both sides of the political aisles. But as you and I started talking, I realized my mind has to adjust or I'm going to lose it. I'm going to start having health issues. I'm going to have to start having stress issues because I open my big mouth. But that doesn't mean I have the ability to fix it. You go to the doctor, the person who offers the diagnosis is not often the one that does the surgery or the prognosis. And so you caused me to begin to think about these things. And so we did narrow it down a little bit. And we said, all right, so here's some things that we can do. We can build capacity in black leaders so that they are around to help to be a part of the solution by helping to create solutions. But we also noticed that some things are going on in the workplace that's called microaggressions, and it happens when in predominantly white spaces, people of color, I'll speak specifically about justified anger and about my work, black people in predominantly white spaces experience things from can I touch your hair to only talking about issues of blackness in the media and a whole array of other things. We realize, and those things have health implications, that because of that kind of stress, it's been considered a social determinant of health, and we now know that it is shortening black lives. We said we're going to focus on a couple of big things. We're going to educate non-black people in U.S. history, not just black history, but U.S. history and the history of the development of social institutions and that have led to systemic racism. And we're going to create space to train black leaders to not only understand how they appreciate themselves and to own their own personal cachet, but we cajole them to please stay in Madison and to be part of serving this community with us. Because by strengthening black leaders and making would-be white allies aware of the issues, perhaps someday those various groups can begin to work together to create solutions themselves. I'll give an example. I got a text message last night from a friend who's going through a pretty serious court case. And he said, hey, do your Nehemiah court observers, and some of you go back and there'll be a link to a previous episode where I spoke with Sandy Renardi about the court observers program, that they have observed 11,000 court cases. So someone writes me and says, they've been sitting in on all of my court cases. Man, this is really cool that Nehemiah is doing it. So here's a person who's interacting, it's a black person, interacting with my white volunteers and thanking me that this is something that we're doing because, and he's got lawyers, he's got good lawyers, he's got real astute lawyers, but there's still something that's being added that white volunteers are sitting there watching what's happening in this case with a black defendant. That's just an example of what I dreamed of having, of being able to create something with our non-black allies that could work together with black leaders that we've been developing to offer some good to the community. But we narrowed it down to this is an area that we're going to work in. Yeah. We're not trying to affect and impact elections. We're not trying to find candidates to run for school board. We're not trying to buy up all of South Madison. Where can we work? Where can we make a change? That's where we started. 11,000 court cases observed, 5,000 graduates from the class, from the history class. But yet when I started working with white allies, funders said to me, these people get it. Shouldn't you be working with the black community? Like they were scratching their heads and wondering, what the hell are you doing out here working with these very good and well-intentioned white people when you should be helping your jacked up black people, not understanding that what we wanted to do in order to impact the issue was to have relationships with and to have an impact on the lives of thousands of people who would do hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of different things like court observers to just move the needle a little bit. To me, that feels like a piece of how you might attack or address some complex issues.
Well, and can I tell you what I just heard you say?
Sure.
You just modeled what the power of a visionary is in marriage with vision implementation capacity. So whose idea was it about the Black History course?
Mine.
Yeah. And you saw a piece of the puzzle, one of the leverage points of intervention, and in a million ways to intervene.
Right.
That if if our community, especially the white community, the dominant cultural community, does not deeply and profoundly understand how we got here,
Right.
we can't shift hearts and minds.
Exactly.
Because, everyone has an opportunity now. We're a society of opportunity, and
Right.
there's nothing that built us here that's getting in the way of kids having the American dream.
Right.
So your insight, the visionary insight, was you feel the resolution. The resolution was pretty concrete,
Right.
which was, okay, we have got to create a intervention where people can come into a conversation with Black history in a way that allows them to really shift their perspective of what has occurred and why we are where we're at.
Exactly.
So that's right.
Exactly.
Now we can write a book about the implementation of that and the dozens, if not hundreds and hundreds of people who have helped that vision come to reality, right?
Right.
But it's driven by that visionary energy, that insight, that seminal insight that then drives the innovation. I would call that a social innovation. Same way, the leadership side is no different for you, which is, your huge part of your driving energy is to build capability within the community, within the Black community, right?
Exactly.
And when that occurs, thousands, if not millions, of things that weren't possible are now possible.
Right.
So a young 20-something man or woman who gets on the journey of becoming the leader, the unique leader they want to be, can be, because that's the interventions you do.
Right.
Their trajectory of the next 30, 40 years will be forever changed. So that's a visionary who has an intervention. The way to intervene is to build capability, real leadership capability. And if we do that, you don't know where they're going to take that capability.
Right. And I don't want to control it.
And you just want to unleash it on behalf of society at some scale. Does that make sense?
It does. When you first said that to me, I thought you were crazy. Like, no, I have to manage it. I've got to count. I have to count those hours as widgets. I have to count all the hours of all the innovation. And you convinced me you can't, nor do you want to, because you limit it.
So then the court system intervention.
Sure.
Again, that's even a tighter resolution, which is we need community members to be witnessing and to be part of this system of civic society on behalf of our community members who are going through it.
Actually, the volunteers said that that's what was needed. We didn't even ask them to do it. They said, this is what we want to do.
Yeah.
What do we need to do in order to do it? Do we need any extra training? Are we allowed to go in the courts? They took it upon themselves with our blessing, of course.
Yeah. And so that then allows people to do the work that they can do. Most people aren't or don't want to be an entrepreneur, want to be an innovator, even want to be a leader. Most people, though, want to create impact. Most people want to contribute. Most people want to serve. And so that's a beautiful way, just of thousands of ideas, but that's a beautiful intervention that I can do something that has immense impact on the trajectory of another human being's life, but on our ability to witness and see this system of justice. And I can get involved and really create a meaningful impact. The ability to create that opportunity is where innovations happen. Can you even possibly map out what the impact is of that intervention?
No, we do some type of ripple report, but we can't because there are things happening that we don't know about.
Yeah.
Jim, let me ask you this. We often talk about how visionaries, like missteps, maybe having too many ideas without getting one, up and running. What mistakes do implementers make towards visionaries? I mean, funders were telling me what I was doing was wrong. They were telling me these are good white people. They're not the problem, implying that the Black people were. Yeah. And so let's take race out of it. Let's I'm not trying to, I don't want to ask, was that a racial move or was that what happens with implementers who think that it's their job to then begin tweaking with vision? What's that called? What's that misstep?
Well, it's not knowing what their lane is, and allowing the visionary to be in their lane truly. Sort of like my perspective in working with you is we got to keep you in the visionary lane. Why? Because that's the engine of the car. I mean, if that engine is not revving, if that engine is not firing, we go nowhere. Now, again, the visionary doesn't want to or is not interested in the thousands of implementation steps along the way.
Not at all.
But if the vision implementer begins to get off course is when they start taking that visionary energy over.
And Jim, let me just say that happens in funding a lot. So now I am going to throw race and funding over on top of it. It probably does come down to temperament. But again, if my vision, my visionariness and my blackness are somehow, if somehow they converge in a way that people can't separate the two, I would just say broader partners do not talk to me like I'm a visionary who can move things along. It's almost like, let's get him back in, almost like a dog you're trying to train. Like, no, get off the coffee, get off the carpet, get back on the paper. It feels like there's this constant movement. And I think that problem, that mindset of not understanding visionariness and then having misgivings about race, I think that has really undermined the ability to get things done with questions like, well, can you manage this process? Can you manage large sums of money? Can you manage, large groups of people? And so the vision implementers, and I don't know if you consider funders that or if that's its own category, but that creeps into, and I talk to my black peers, some of them are visionaries, others are vision implementers. I mean, they implement maybe their predecessor's vision. I'm a founder, so I'm implementing the vision that started the organization. I'm not taking over the Urban League or the NAACP or Big Brothers Big Sisters. But what we all have this common discussion that white funders are telling us, no, you're going about that wrong. You're dealing with the wrong group of constituents. This is what you need to be doing. And somehow funding makes it right. Not asking you to comment on funding, but just I think from a technical and an implementer's perspective, we've been told and our wrists have been slapped to stay in our lanes. But when do we start slapping the wrists of the implementers who speak with the level of authority, and often that authority is backed with philanthropic dollars that tries to course correct what we're doing all the time?
Yeah, I mean, if you pull back a little bit and just get into the mind of funders, philanthropic funders,
sure,
they're in a world where they are bombarded with ideation energy,
sure,
with ideas coming to them. Why is someone approaching a funder? They're approaching a funder to fund an idea that they have, and it's almost always in the context of nonprofits, and so they are seen and have seen countless ideas come at them. They frankly have a enormous track record at funding projects that failed,
right,
that didn't go anywhere, and so they have this bias around risk management that they need to solve the problem. So funders are in the business of trying to suss out this basket of ideas that are coming at them relentlessly and figuring out which bets to make and which bets not to make. And the culture of MBAism has inculcated funders over the last 20 years, much to the good and oftentimes to the detriment. And, so they are looking for what? Defined outcomes. That's a huge part of that world, which is if we give you this, what are the outcomes associated? Then of course, they ask the question, which is, is this an organization that can get done,
sure,
that can execute,
right,
that has the implementation capacity for this idea that we're going to fund? And that's where they start asking questions that starts to create a tension between the funder and the organization that's creating ideas.
And I don't mind their questions. I mind their directions or their redirecting. So I don't mind them asking questions, but they should fund you for what they funded you for and let you do that. But I guess the issue comes when they say you shouldn't be doing this history class. Like, this is really a waste. And it becomes core to the success of what we're doing. If I were fearful about my funding, I would have shut the project down. I'm just thinking there was a lot of pressure thinking this is not going to get us to the desired
welcome
outcomes.
to the world of innovation. I mean, you're getting a lot of no's. You're getting a lot of that makes no sense. You're getting a lot that's the tension of an idea trying to get birthed in the world, which is it is a tough climb.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's for sure.
Yeah, and so it's not for the faint of heart. There's countless stories about innovations that take decades in the making, or you've chased 30, 40, 50 funding sources to get an idea out of the ground, or you've tried it 13 different ways before it ultimately gained traction. So that conversation is oftentimes the funders telling you why it can't work. That's why we won't fund you.
Right.
Or they're saying we will fund you, but you have to do it this way, which then creates a very different dynamic.
And that's part of the reason we don't find good outcomes. I won't even say solutions, but outcomes in areas of race, because the people who are the furthest away from the issues but the closest to the bank are the ones trying to call the shots. And it took a special strength to be able to stick to our guns.
Well, think about the Black History course. I mean, that was not on the table in the documents that I saw.
No, it wasn't.
And in some ways, it was. Again, back to how a novel idea starts to mutate its way into the world. Somewhere in that process, you began to shift your sense of where the interventions were that mattered. And then what you could do and not do. Again, at the end of the day, there are visionaries who are off in La La Land who can't bring their feet onto the ground, right? I mean, they are up in the clouds, cannot connect to reality. No one can help them.
Sure.
But you have a pretty good capacity to want a point of traction.
Right.
On the ground to get an idea done.
Right. This is a small community. You can't burn too many bridges. You have to produce something.
Yeah, I would say your frustration over the last probably 30 years is you have not had enough vision implementers and capacity around you to ground those ideas over time.
Or I've had them and they thought that their job was to micromanage or correct me.
Yeah.
But still, I think to your point, you don't have them. So help me for a minute, just encourage our listeners, because they're trying to figure out the next things to do, Jim. So I'm going to give you a chance to be a consultant. And so for the listeners that are saying, I think I found an organization. They're doing good work. They've got a good, strong visionary leader. I want to get involved. I don't want to make any mistakes. What would be like your 15-second admonition or encouragement to those individuals who are my listeners, many of whom are white? But in terms of what you do or don't do to support visionaries of the vision, what would you say to encourage them or challenge them?
And it's in every endeavor, if you're trying to create impact, is first off, reflect on who you are, what your gifts are, what your capabilities are, and because that's the starting point. Because that what those gifts are, what those talents are, is what you can contribute. So it's like, I'm not a very good. If you're asking me to sit down with third graders and help them read an hour or two a week, that's just not my temperament. You have to figure out what it is your gifts are. From there, it's then being able to step into how can I actually help with a great degree of humility. The symbiotic relationship is. What many are asking for is help me understand how I can help.
Right.
And that's where I think the dominant culture starts to get stuck, which is I don't know I want to be of service. I want to help. I want to contribute. I want to help solve this problem. And this problem is, this vast array of things. I don't know what I can do. What's really predominant in the space is most people, their first rule is first do no harm. Mm-hmm. I don't want to do harm, which means most people just step away, step aside.
Overly cautious.
Yeah, because they don't want to do something that is not seen as being helpful. But it's find some place in this ecosystem of societal impact that your gifts can be applied in a way that's helpful to another human being, to an organization. And sometimes that is about licking stamps and sealing envelopes. I mean, it's down to brass tacks oftentimes that it really helps an organization that is doing complex work in the world, helping them in ways that you can serve them.
Those envelopes help you get money in so that you can do the work. I'm curious, as you talk to your colleagues, and you and I have never had this conversation, but I'm curious, your friends and colleagues around the country, do they ask you, Jim, is it different doing the work that you're doing with Black people or the Black community? Because I mean, you're my point person on a lot with the center, so I'm just curious, and if that's putting you on the spot, you can tell me. But have your friends asked, is it different working with? Have they asked you that? Is it different working with the Black community?
Yeah.
What do you tell them?
No.
No.
I absolutely. It's cross-cultural work.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it is profoundly cross-cultural work, and so in every way we are navigating multiple cultural spaces.
Oh, definitely.
And that's the problem that makes it 10x more complex.
At least.
Because the space is complex in a way that many other spaces aren't.
And do people just stay away from that because of its complexity, or do they just trample all over the fences? I mean, I know it can be both, but I guess, do you think the majority of the people just say, "Oh, I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole"?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's now, and we're in 2024,
right? And
race is a overwhelming hot button issue.
More so than when you and I met, maybe 2005, 2006.
And so increasingly, people just don't want to get close to it because they don't know where the ground is.
So they just give money to it, or just talk well about it, or just
write some
ignore
checks, or just don't know how to impact it, or don't want to step into the stew of this cross-cultural work.
And by understanding the complexity of it, and I don't mean just in its difficulty, but in terms of complex adaptive problems, does that help you to see issues that are overladen with race differently? I mean, once you factor out some of the complex adaptive nature of it, do you think it makes it easier for you to deal with some of the racial nuances, as opposed to someone who thinks that everything is solely race related when they step in it?
Yeah, I mean, the gift of you and me working together has been that we honor the difference in us, but we also celebrate it, and we also allow for the tension of it.
Right. And that takes a while.
And actually get to working together.
That's a good description.
So I think you said, I mean, the challenge of working, across race is, do you and I sit across the table and work out our differences, our issues, having a cup of coffee after cup of coffee after cup of coffee?
Right.
Or I think you had this seminal insight, which is, no, you get to some work that matters and work together. And in that process,
we'll talk through things.
We'll talk through things as they come up. So often things don't come up,
right?
Because we're getting stuff done, and we're people of goodwill towards each other. But every once in a while, we step in it, and I would say, because this is predominantly Black cultural space, that I'm the one who steps in it. Really, here, and you can step into it with pure intent, that you don't even know that you're. Let me give you a good example. We just got a new puppy and had to go to an Amish enclave in Ohio to get our puppy.
Sure.
And we drove into this community that was horse and buggy and no electricity, and I knew the space I was walking into, and so I was very respectful of how to enter that space, which of course I didn't know how to enter that space. I saw a woman across the yard. Again, there were multiple houses, and I didn't know if I should speak to her that why we were driving into their yard, and so I stepped into asking her who I could speak to about the puppy, and she of course knew I was coming. And immediately, a man came out of a barn and came towards me, and we connected that way. But I was on high intention that I was in their cultural space, and I was trying to be respectful.
Right.
So far so good. And my demeanor was over the charts respectful, trying to be.
What'd you do?
So
you shook the woman's hand?
No. So here's what I did. So we were.
You didn't call her gal, did you?
No. So I was talking to the man, and my wife and daughter obviously fell in love with the dog, and so I was closing the deal, and he was giving me the papers, the vet papers, and all this stuff, the papers on the dog, and so I pulled out the money. There's a little boy. His little boy was standing there, and I assumed the little boy had brought up the dog and had been part of the care and was saying goodbye to the dog, and this was part of his and so the man was fumbling with his papers, and so kind of as a gesture of acknowledgement to the boy, I gave him the money. And and it was like, oh crap.
Oh.
So needless to say, he the gentleman was gracious about it.
Sure.
And, in this moment of trying to be intentional about culture, to this day, I assume I said I stepped over a line, but I don't know that to be true. And I immediately said, oh crap, I stepped over that line, which may or may not have been a line, and with no intention of doing harm, with no intention of doing anything to do anything but communicate respect for them and their community and their culture and the gift they were giving to us of this dog that they had cared for. But that stuff happens, right?
So is the bad thing in there that it seemed like you were doing something inappropriate with the child, or
I don't know,
but it just felt awkward when it happened?
Well, a little bit awkward. He kind of a little bit awkward, but it was also, I have no idea.
Did the dad take the money from him?
Eventually, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. But it doesn't matter.
Right.
What matters was it was cross-cultural space, and I didn't know the cultural norms, and I assume I likely stepped into it, and if I had been in relationship with them, I would have needed to clean that up, because it was my faux pas. So that's been the gift of this space, and the challenge of this space in working is that if you're in cross-cultural space, you are going to step over the line, step in it. The challenge for people in dominant culture is, can you stay?
Yes.
Can you stay?
That's the big question.
Can you stay in the heat of it? What I noticed from the Black community is a real ability to name that tension, but also a deep willingness to allow for those moments to pass.
Right.
Because
we've experienced so many of them, we can't get hung up on them.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Jim, I really have appreciated this discussion, because I want people to understand the complexity of the type of work that I'm engaged in, we're engaged in building these bridges, creating a better future, creating space for the Black community to share its stories of perseverance, to invite the broader community in, to understand a different side of our lives than just what's portrayed in the media and popular culture. And the discussion around the complexity being centered around not only race, but temperament and leadership styles, and what the problem is. Is it a technical problem or a complex adaptive one? Is something that I rarely, if ever, have heard discussed in terms of race. And I think that that's why it doesn't, we don't make better, we don't experience better strides. And so I just think that this is something that, that I want people to really ponder. You know, those of you who are part of the Black Like Me, family, people that are involved in cross-cultural issues. They want to help, or maybe they tried to help and had a bad experience. They didn't know what went wrong. It just felt awkward and the conversations didn't continue. I want you to share this. I want you to share what you're learning and what you're hearing, because that might even help you to understand what needs to happen in your workplace, your places of faith, your community organizations, or even something that you need to understand about your children and their friends. But this discussion about what makes this work so complex, yet so rewarding, is something that I think we all can benefit from. So listen to it. Listen to this again. Share it out, share it on social media, write a comment, write a review, let your friends and circles know that you're really learning things here at Black Like Me podcast. That's helping you to really think or rethink the world around you. As always, I ask you to lean in and to do something with what you have learned. You can click the Patreon link to become a supporter, to help us to continue to bring this great podcast to you with exceptional excellence and programming quality. But none of this is for mere entertainment. Let people know how you're being changed by the things that you're learning here, the things that you're hearing here. That helps the work of Black Like Me podcast. So I want to thank you all for being the best part of this podcast by listening. To those of you who are already Patreon supporters, thank you so much. And thanks for taking the time to listen and to share this podcast. Have a great day.
Black Like Me. Black Like Me.
I want to thank you for taking time to listen to this episode of Black Like Me podcast with Dr. Alex G. When I first imagined doing this podcast, I thought about myself with my iPhone sitting in a room in my house, just sort of doing this all on my own. But you know what? The reason why we've won awards and the reason why we have over 200 episodes up is because I have a brilliant team who helps me to make this podcast what it is. So let me take a moment and thank Jeremy and Eli, who are my editors and producers extraordinaire, Jakisha, who handles marketing. If you like that opening track of our theme song, you can show your appreciation to Corey Saffold, who created that and produced it, and Marcus Fleming, my cousin, who's on vocals. I also want to say that this podcast was started with the generous support of the Human Family Unity Foundation, and so we always want to stop and thank them for that. For the many patrons who support us through our Patreon page, thank you. You don't just listen, but you support, you lean in, and you help this podcast to be what it is. And then I need to thank you, the listeners, who make a point of downloading this, listening to it, and sharing it. Without all of you, this podcast would not be what it is and what it's becoming. Thank you so much.
Black Like Me.